contrasts.
Yes.
As the loop of slides comes to an end, we have a couple of technical adjustments to make. This would be the time for members of the Zoom audience to adjust your settings to minimize the slideshow, which will continue at a slower speed for the people in the auditorium. And so the virtual viewers will see in full screen mode Victoria LeBlanc and Gabriel Safdie.
You'll tell me if I'm holding this correctly. Yes? Okay. So thank you. Thank you, Lynn, for that introduction. And one of the reasons I think I was chosen to do this with Gabriel is because I helped him with the book, editing the text and the many, many photographs that we had to sift through and choose. And one of the things I'm going to do, I know a lot of you already know Gabriel, but for those of you who are not as familiar with him, I'm just going to read a very condensed summary of his very long biography for those of you who are less familiar with him. Gabriel was born in Jerusalem, Palestine. He was 13 when his family emigrated to Montreal from Israel in 1953. While studying at McGill initially in commerce, in his last year he decided to pursue literature and then never really looked back. And he did an honors in English at Sir George and then an MA at UBC in literature and creative writing. That was then followed by doctoral studies in London and Paris at the University of London and at the Sorbonne. And all the while he was studying, he was writing a novel and poetry, and he was also teaching until his return to Montreal in 1971, where initially he was an editor at Tundra Books before starting to teach literature and creative writing at Dawson, where he taught for 15 or 16 years. And this leads us, the next part, into the book, Affair with China, because in 1983, he was convinced by his father to join him in China in support of his father's work with the family home textile importing company. And this really marks the beginning of Gabriel's love affair with China. And when his father passed in 1986, Gabriel ended up taking charge. This led to extensive travel and rich cultural explorations, not just in China over 40 years, but in other countries, India, Egypt, Southeast Asia, Mexico, Brazil, etc. But always alongside his business affairs, he remained deeply engaged in the arts himself, and also in lending his support to many arts organizations. He's well known in Montreal as contributing to the development of theater, Infini Theater especially, music, visual arts, literary arts, in Montreal and also in Stansted, where he has a home with his wife, Eva. How I met Gabriel was as the curator of two of his exhibitions at Victoria Hall Gallery in Westmount. The first was on India, 2008, and the second was in 2018, mesmerizing photos of the Day of the Dead celebration in Mexico. I have to say that on both occasions, the greatest challenge was selecting out of the thousands of photographs, each of which told a very human story, and getting them down to have enough just for an exhibition. So when I first started working with Gabriel on this book, I realized that that challenge was multiplied 1,000 times, because your goal was to record 40 years of over 40 years of time spent in China, with the interweaving of several vital threads, one of which he was involved as an entrepreneur, the economic transformations he saw around him and that he was involved in. The second one, his continuing interest in the cultural legacy of China, and even in the contemporary arts that were going on in China. And then lastly, the political transformations during those 40 years, a very pivotal watershed time in the evolution of China. So my first question to you, Gabriel, is, when did you first start thinking that you wanted, that a book was necessary? You had to write a book on China.
Well, the thought sort of creeped in on me, because as I was moving on and seeing so much of the country and really exploring so much of the culture, as well as along with the other work I was doing, which is company and so on. But along with that, I was really traveling so extensively. Even to start with, even just the factories I was visiting were all around the country. So it made it very easy for me to extend a trip to a factory to this region and explore and so on. So I mean, it was that kind of experience, and so I was getting closer and closer with the people, and that made a huge difference too. I felt as I was moving along, and I would say, I don't know how long ago exactly, but this has to be put down. I've got to capture this. I've got to share this with people, because I'm seeing so much and learning so much. And it's progressive. It's from year to year to year. I had this talk recently at the Blue Metropolis, and Charlie, a foreigner who was my interviewer, he said to me, because he'd been to China, he worked there, he taught there and so on, he knew China. And he said, the one thing is that you have, in the book, you have this progression as things move on. Cataclysmic change is happening along the way, but while all of that is, and so to see the movements that lead up to these changes, to see it in the people, to see it in the business world, which is very significant for China, of course, and to see it also in the world of art and culture, and to be able to look back into the 5,000 years in history along the way, because I was exploring the old places too. So yeah.
One of the things I think that's in the beginning of the book.
Yeah.
What struck me most is from the very beginning.
Closer.
What struck me most, thank you, is how you saw the Chinese people when you first arrived in 1983. And I remember one particular incident with your father, and you're at a business meeting, and your father hears that you've been talking to the business associates about art and culture, and he just thinks, this is a bit outrageous, and why aren't you on track? But then he comes to understand how this aspect of who you are was a benefit. So why don't you tell that?
No, the way it happened was that we were going around, and I was not so interested really yet, but learning, picking up here and there what's going on. But my mind was still on getting to know China more, and I mean, this is like what I was still teaching, and so my father heard from one of the Shanghai people who were a little more whatever. Anyway, that, well, your son, I think they wanted to see that he had a successor with him, and he wanted me to parade me as a successor, and I had no intention of ever doing that. But it says, he's very interested in the culture and this and that, and and he thought it was a kind of a criticism. We got to this big fight, and we had a fight in the car that they sent us to the airport in, and then he blew up. He said, and you had let me get upset in front of the driver. The plane comes in, the little plane comes to takes us to Hangzhou from Shanghai. It's not far away, but today it's like an hour, but on the speed train, but it was hours then. And so we can't even see each other in the plane. We're sitting apart, it was very funny. We get there, and there's a new guy there, a young man, they started a new branch corporation that were becoming independent corporations, becoming very big independent corporations, offshoot for this one from Shanghai, right? They had all these new corporations coming in the big cities, growing and mushrooming like crazy. Anyway, this young man, so it turns out that he'd been a poet, and also he had been a teacher. And we really hit it off. I mean, so, and he starts to tell me things that really interested my father, like things about the corporation and what the plans were and things that he really thought was so valuable for his company, for his business. So that's when he went around, oh, my son, he's a poet, he's a professor, So that's what opened up the doors for me in another way,
And he saw that as an advantage to helping the business. So I thought that was really an interesting episode in the beginning of the book. One of the things you also mentioned is that a lot of the people that you're working with, because in China they had to take and study in certain areas to fit the needs of the economy, that a lot of those people did have their own passions and artistic goals as well. So that
they did. Actually, in that vein, that's true. I mean, the people were assigned jobs. I mean, so some of them had other interests and so on, but they were being fed into the system. And if they knew English or they had studied English, that it was good for business and so on. It was according to what the needs were in the system. And so that's how people got the jobs. At the time, I'm talking about the 80s going into the 90s. And but there's an example, when I had my sister Sylvia and John Heward, they were her husband, her partner actually, they were both artists, and I was able to arrange for them a very great exhibition, a very significant exhibition in the Forbidden City, 2 pavilions in the Forbidden City, where there'd just been artists showing, even foreign artists, and so that was something that they could do. And 2 of them, 2 artists, there were 2 pavilions, we arranged all that. And the thing is that at the same time as this was happening, and it was a very big event, because we were opening up, bringing things I was bringing to China and then introducing them to foreign things, the way I did with theater and so on. So, the China text, which became my biggest supplier, my biggest source of over many factories, but still my biggest source from Beijing, the central office of China Text. The president, who was he saw photos in his office, in the company of all heads of state meeting him and so on. He was a
big wig. He was a big wig.
And he arranged an exhibition for his own people. It happened to be at the same time. So you had wonderful visual art there, photography as well as painting and sculpture, all there from his own employees of the big company. And you realize that these people have a lot of, not only talent they have, but there's that kind of interest in. And that was a very important thing. So throughout, I think, I was always trying to bring together business and art and culture.
That's a wonderful theme through the book, the fact that you were able to do that. I want to go back a little bit. At the end of your first chapter, we end with it's called Entering the Dragon's Lair. And at the end of that chapter, we have the 1989 Tiananmen Square protests and the massacre on June 4th. And even today, this remains a very sensitive and censored topic in China. So I wondered if you could just share with us a little bit your own experience. I know you went over there at that time in '89 with Eva. You'd just been married and you were planning to celebrate your honeymoon.
In Hawaii, not in China.
No, but you'd gone to China first, and then you were planning, but you got very much caught up in all the protests leading up to the Tiananmen Square, because it's quite interesting that you were there at that time. I wonder if you could just talk about it a little bit.
Yes, this was a very important, extremely important experience for me, and very pivotal, I would say. And Eva, she's Danish. I met her in Mexico, but she was living in Mexico. She's Danish. She had studied before she went into Hispanic studies, and she had studied Chinese sinology. It was incredible. I mean, she had actually studied by coincidence, and it was great to go with her to China. She understood. She had a sense of the language and so on, a feeling about it, and the culture. So we went to China, and here we are. And it was actually one of the talk about China Text. One of the head people there who said to me, "Listen, you better go to China's Tiananmen Square," and it was not far from there, because something important is happening. So that's from a corporation, a chief, just to show you that everybody was interested in that movement, not just the students. And so we went, and then I saw, my goodness, I couldn't believe my eyes. I mean, being very much a counterculture person myself through the 60s and 70s in London and in Paris and here and out west and UBC and all that. I mean, for me, that was something so exciting to see a true, sincere, very pure movement building up the way it was. And slowly, of course, it was gathering not just students, but also people from, different walks of life. A lot of workers and so on. Anyway, I was there for the month. We were there from the 2nd of May to the 3rd of June. The massacre took place on the 4th of June. We happened to cross over. We were not sure when it would happen. We were getting worried that something would, because the movement was growing and growing, and not the right people were able to move make the right decisions and influence Deng Xiaoping about what to do next. And I could talk about this for so long, so I better kind of condense this, but we saw it in different cities. There's some photos here from Shanghai, for example, that you saw before, and it was an extraordinarily moving and really uplifting experience to be there with that. But we saw that as this was growing and growing, and the government couldn't manage it, Gorbachev was arriving. He was supposed to be presented in Tiananmen, to meet and greet in Tiananmen Square. He couldn't. He was taken over by the students and by the demonstrators. They had to deal with that. And after détente of 30 years, there was nothing between China and Russia. Imagine the relationship now between China and Russia for 30 years, from the time of Gorbachev to 1989. And Gorbachev was the first head of state coming to China for a meeting. So it was a very important time for the Chinese to handle, and they were very scared that the leaders were very scared that something from the perestroika and what was going on in Russia would kind of, it would influence the events in as they were also again later on during the Arab Spring. They were always worried that that would build. Anyhow, so I could go on, please.
So I think what's interesting is you end the first chapter with the Tiananmen Square, and then the second chapter, Rise of the Legendary Dragon. So you return the next year, and to what you term is a grim city, and you describe within just that 1 year already the changes that you felt, the more materialistic drive, the greater suppression of free speech, and you say that you could really feel a difference already in the following
Well, it's
year.
a double-edged thing. I mean, first of all, we come back to, and Eva was with me, we come back to start in Beijing this time, and everything was dead. You saw military, go around, marching through Tiananmen Square, no tourism, even business, everything was really, because the aftermath of the 1989 massacre was huge. It was on the world news for 6 months non-stop, the story of the massacre and the aftermath. It was a very big thing. It affected the world. It reached the world's imagination. There was a very famous video of the man who walked up to the tanks,
Yes, with his bags.
It's an incredible thing, yeah, with his holding two bags and challenging the tanks coming in, Anyway.
And then he climbed up.
Which we saw when we were in Hawaii on the CNN, actually. We were coming back, and we had that so-called honeymoon in Hawaii after that, and after the Tiananmen Square, and it was it had a huge impact. Somebody brought me some photos, a friend from Beijing who managed to get out because there was not much movement, but he managed to get out because of some important business meeting. He came up to my house and he presented me with some photos that were taken after, what I didn't see there, but I did. By the way, when we were in Hong Kong, we could see the massacre because it was accessible to us there. Hong Kong, it was huge demonstrations that were repeated many, many years until the Chinese took over Hong Kong more recently. But the thing is, you have this. How can I say? So these photos that were showed the post, what happened with the tanks and what happened with the destruction, and of course, many people were killed. Nobody knows how many thousands, but and Judy Mappin of Double Hook Bookstore had posted them, and many people came to see those photos. There was a great interest in this. So I'm just saying it was a very, but Deng Xiaoping, and that's what you're referring to. But the second part, Deng Xiaoping chose at that moment, he's the one who had to give the order for the tanks to take over and for the massacre to happen. He's the one, he was influenced by people, but it's too complicated to explain now. But the thing is that Deng Xiaoping, with his slogans, slogans were important in China, and they used to post them around. And a lot of government, propaganda, was posted on the various social, areas.
There's this one. It does not matter if the cat is black or white, so long as it catches mice.
There's a lot in that one. You understand? That one was a big one, yeah. And that was actually because it showed it didn't matter how you do it. You just go get on with it and make your money or do your business. Everybody was caught up with business. They had lost the hope for any change, and with the crushing of the movement. So I think that the country just flipped on. And when things happen in China, they can happen really en masse. You can't imagine, like fads, for example, they'd be en masse, and people can congregate in huge numbers in various. You can see that on the news. You can see that's online actually. So what happened was that the way it happened is that China became very capitalist. That was a flip over into capitalism. I started, the chapter was called, it's happened when the book was published, but it's really called The Rise of the One-Eyed Dragon. And I talk about the One-Eyed Dragon because to me, there was just one vision.
Yes.
Because Deng Xiaoping opened up, sure, reform and opening up, but opening up what? No, nothing to do with politics or social movements or social issues. No rule of law, no freedom of speech. Yes. Those are the two things that I always argue with the Chinese about. The rule of law and freedom of speech. I would say argue when they want to explain to me how well they're doing and all that. I say, yeah, but they're so far away from that in their system. And so what happened was that everybody's children, people having the one-child family, right, at this time, 1979 on to 2014 was one-child family. It was very, very rigid law. And but so the children all studying business, the army was into business, everything. So it took over the country by force. Yeah, in 1990s, yeah.
One thing that you talk about throughout the book is this conflict. You talk about Confucius a lot because you were interested in him both as a sage and also as a poet, Confucius the poet. But you talk about the role of Confucianism in the history of China. And how would you say, I know that this question was asked of you a little bit at Blue Metropolis, how would you say that the ethics of Confucianism are still active or affect modern China today and interface with those more economic goals? I know there's the term Confucian socialism or socialism with Chinese characters. Is that their attempt to maintain some kind of link with the past, and or is it superficial, or is it really still something that's part
during the Cultural Revolution, which is 1966 to 1976, and Chairman Mao died at the last year of the Cultural Revolution, and so did Zhou Enlai. But that was the end. That marked the end of an era. But those 10 years were a nightmare. There was the most horrible period, one of the worst periods in the Chinese history, I think. And the people was turning on each other, and the young, Red Guard was sent out to destroy any kind of history. They were destroying temples. They were destroying all kinds of history. And sometimes Zhou Enlai was able to save some things, but there was a lot of destruction going on of culture. They were trying to get away from all the culture. And Chairman Mao used this movement that he whipped up, to divert attention and to keep himself in power. The old story of keeping yourself in power. We see it happening right now with a number of people I can name, leaders. But there were three pillars. There were three pillars of thought and foundation of the history of China. It's Confucianism, yes, is one. Taoism and Buddhism are the other two. And they're so important in Chinese history and in Chinese thinking. So, and Confucianism was the way to order society, to the values of Confucianism, to keep the families in the right way, and to
maintaining a kind of social order.
Yeah. So that's how that worked. But there are certain periods when like I said, during the Cultural Revolution, for example, they were not looking at that, or they were trying to get away. But very soon after that, these basic pillars and foundations of the thought were more and more back in, and and in fact, if anything, as the years move on, encouraged by the leaders, especially with Xi Jinping, who wants to use culture as a way to get the people back focusing on China and feeling Chinese, and and so on, and to make China more independent from other cultures and thinking, because there's so much in all of the West always, and in all the United States and all that. But I would say that the thinking goes very deep. They like say Confucian thought goes very deep into the fabric of thought and behavior, and I think that it's one of the things that help to order Chinese society.
Yes. Yeah. One of the things you touched on this a little bit already, but one of the things I think the book does really well is it bears witness in some ways, and it captures these disappearing cultures, this whole idea of the Hanification of China, and the problems that the more ethnic groups have. And I know that you spent a lot of time in the autonomous regions of, how do you pronounce it? Xinjiang? Xinjiang. I can never get it right.
Xinjiang, Tibet.
Never can get it right. And Tibet and Inner Mongolia. And there are some wonderful photos of the Uyghur people on the reel here in the cities of Kashgar and Urumqi in Xinjiang. And from the photos, you really get a sense of a vivid way of life, their culture, their arts. But you also talk in the book, and we know it's continuing, of the political suppression of the Uyghur culture, the programs of assimilation, and as part of the Hanification, not just of the Uyghurs, but of the Tibetans. And wondered if you could talk a little bit about your time in Kashgar and Urumqi, because you really seem to connect with the people there, their music and food and...
Yeah. I connected with the people everywhere.
I know, but
I'm saying that
there's some wonderful pictures in here.
I'm saying, no, you're right, but the other minorities there, for example, there are many, there
Yes.
are 56 minorities in China, 56 minorities, but 90% of Chinese are Han. And I made up to the verb that I came up with, to Hanify. I mean, when I'm writing the book, to Hanify, that is to make people into Han. And throughout the Chinese history, going back thousands of years, there's always been, you see, China has not been, how can I say, imperialistic in the same way as Western Europe, the European countries have been. Not at all. Actually, when a great Chinese general went in 500 years ago with the great ships, greater than the ships of Europe, to Africa, he got there, he saw it, whatever. He came back, reported it to the emperor. That was the Ming Dynasty. He reported to the emperor and says, "Listen," and the emperor just said, "Oh, very interesting," and so on, and continued to focus, because China always grew concentrically, always. So the borders of China moved, they moved around. If you look at the history, but whatever growth there was concentric. Inner Mongolia, Xinjiang, which is the northwest of China. Inner Mongolia is north. It's just from between Mongolia, Russia, and China, and Tibet. They form 40% of the landmass of China. That's a lot. That's why China will desperately hold on to these, and will, now they've had a huge amount of success in bringing down the Uyghur people from being a culture of their own to becoming more and more Han. You've heard this in the news quite a bit, I think, in the last few years. A lot of news about the Uyghur people, but the Tibetan people are always fighting to have something. Well, a new law came up very recently, quite recently. A big official law that is imposing in the educational system on the importance of teaching Chinese, and to do away with the local languages, whether it's Tibetan or, just trying to Hanify, because they want everyone to be the same. But now the minorities that I met in the central part of China, like in the province of Guizhou, they're building the infrastructure in China. It's something I could talk about separately as well. The infrastructure is unbelievable. It's so unbelievable. The roadworks and the
trains,
bridges,
the bridges.
You look at online, you can see. You can't imagine it looks like science fiction, like it's not possible to build things like that, but they're doing that all the time. They're doing it more and more. So I mentioned that because, but by having this kind of infrastructure, they can reach any part, and there are lots of places that are becoming now open. Even cultural places of great interest. If I go and continue to go to China, I would like to explore. But I mean, because they can reach places everywhere. The road, you can't imagine how much is worked into this network of roads and the speed train. We're so pathetic here. We're in North America. We're so pathetic with our the electric car was a big fight to get going. Now it's going. It's okay. But of course the Chinese are number one on electric cars. But the speed train, that's unbelievable. I mean, Japan was strong. Europe. China is, when you got into it, it's unbelievable. I mean, I could go from Beijing to Shanghai in 5 hours. It used to be an overnight trip, by train. It's just incredible. So, and I mentioned that because I was talking about how now even the small minorities getting swept into the, this whole building and opening up and commercially opening up cultural and natural, beautiful natural sites there. You can't imagine. That's also in my book, but you have.
But you also talk in a couple of places about how they do want to keep some of these Uyghur and they set them as almost tourist spots. Do they? Don't you talk a little bit about that?
No, they tend to. Well, I mean, we see this in other countries too, but the scale of it is always great in China, whatever they do. Yeah. Well, I mean, they'll open up places and make into a showplace instead of.
Yeah, a showplace.
I was so lucky to be able to get to travel in places that were the way they were at the time, be it in Tibet or in central China or in northern China, but to see places which are now so have lost any of the the historical sense or any. So I was very, very lucky in my timing, but yeah, so it's true. You're right, and yeah.
One of the things that also recurs throughout the book is your visits to the Bookworm bookstore and cafe bar in Beijing, which was kind of a local hangout, and you seem to have some fascinating exchanges there and met, I think, other Canadians there or brought Canadians there.
I met a lot of Chinese writers,
poets.
Chinese journalists,
so
Chinese,
it was
but also Canadian, also because it's open to the world. So, I mean, the Bookworm bookstore in Beijing. It was a very important place for me because I could really meet people I could talk with there, and get to know more about the inner workings of the cultural life of China and so on, the intellectual life of China, I should say. And we had some events there too, because when I brought in a play to China, they would have an event there. The embassy would. The cultural, department, of the Canadian embassy in Beijing were very helpful to me. In fact, I just spoke the other day to a person who was the culture attaché when my sister Sylvia was there in 1996. Who we're still in touch, imagine. But she was saying how incredible that was a great moment. But they will continue to be helpful to us. The that's a nice thing to know. I mean, to hear about. But the Bookworm was like a nerve center in a way. It's closed down, by the way, and it closed down during Xi Jinping's latter part of his more during the pandemic. But it's really sad to see that go because it was a great place for a meeting of minds. And I heard a lot, and people's more dissentives, people dissentants would come to me more from people I met there, rather than people I met in business, but not necessarily entirely there. It was not completely so. Dissent is something that in China, I would say, I felt it was important to me because I was very sympathetic to the Chinese cause for wanting to find more freedom in their life. People like Ai Weiwei, Liu Xiaobo, who received the Nobel Peace Prize, but who remained in prison and died in prison. A great, very truly valiant person. People like that. Just very very recently, it's in my book too. In the coda, I talk about Jimmy Lai. Jimmy Lai was a terrific guy who had this great newspaper in Hong Kong. He's kept in prison. He's 70 years old. He's actually, not in good health, and they just want to prolong his 18-year prison sentence, whatever it is, because he had this newspaper that spoke during the time that Hong Kong was still open. And then, you know the story that more recently Hong Kong was, the Chinese government decided to renege on the agreement that they had with Hong Kong that it would stay there would be two cultural living in harmony of an open one like Hong Kong, post-British, and it's no longer so. Now the next thing is for them to try to take over Taiwan, and there's a lot of talk about whether yes or no, whatever, but that's very, and it could happen, and it could be a bloodbath, yeah.
Yeah, we know that now.
Yeah.
One of the things, too, that is so evident through the book and evident in your life even here is your incredible capacity to engage with people. And that capacity, that talent, really makes this book special because you'll go into where they're gathered in a food court, or you'll meet people at a business meeting, and you seem to be able to engage very personally with them, to the point when I was working with you, you would repeat conversations word for word, and I said, Gabriel, you can't possibly remember that. Oh, yes, and 2 months later, he'd repeat it exactly the way he repeated it the first time, so I had to believe him. And one of the friendships I find most interesting in the book is with another photographer, Chang, in the Dong Valley, and you ended up traveling with him through very interesting areas.
Guizhou province, yeah. It's very. It was still, the place was still, but that's now they're building bridges into it. You know, but really minorities that have been there as they are for hundreds.
What minorities were they?
The Dong is the main one. The Dong, the others, the separate.
And that's not the matriarchal society?
No, that's in a place that's more a Tibetan place. It's near, that's on the Lake Lugu. It's a very interesting place in China also. They have a matriarchal society that's quite known. And
one of the photos that's been looping here is of women with this, and I think are they part of the matriarchal society?
Yeah. Oh, that was a very interesting place to go to, I must say. Yeah.
No, go on. You want to talk about them because I think it is a really interesting interaction you have.
No, but that's a society. This is a true matriarchal society, and the men, which I've seen in other countries, but it is still active, and it is a matrilineal, matriarchal and matrilineal, which means that the women are the ones that carry on child and carry on with the. And the men go around and so on, and then sometimes the couple decides to they want to stay together more, and so they do, and but it's a very open-ended society, and they really look after themselves. But when I was there was a meeting that the women had. I have a photo of them. This gathering, they're trying to decide how to deal with the tourism that's starting to reach their area, coming in from south. Anyway, so
Well, we don't have much more time, and I wanted to just talk a little bit about how you end the book with your coda. And I found it really interesting that on one side of the page, there's a picture of the seated Buddha inside what's known as the wooden pagoda, built in 1056 in Shaanxi province. And on the other side is a very formidable warning attributed to Napoleon Bonaparte, who says, "Let the dragon sleep, for when she awakens, the world will tremble." And that you chose to end the book with these two opposing forces, kind of terror and peace. And really, it seems that throughout the book, you're always searching for an equilibrium between these forces of, tradition and rapid modernization. And I wondered if you could talk about, how you feel at the end of having had this affair. Not that you won't go back. We hope you'll get to go back safely, having written this book. But is that how you feel generally about this affair you've had? That these two forces are equal? Is one overcoming the other? What would you like to say about that?
The only force that's there now, as far as power goes, is the Communist Party and the leader of the Communist Party. That's what it is. But at the same time, there are elements around, of the culture that are still very much alive. In fact, like I said before, the government is putting a lot of money into museums and this and that. They're really trying to, and doing a lot of restoration, so on, the way it was done in the Qing dynasty. It's like they're trying, and so there's that going on. So the glorification of the culture and of the history, on one hand, is true. The party's doing it for political reasons, but in fact, I see young people, a lot of young people going to the museums, going to shows, going to so on, musical events and so on. So it's nice to see that, but at the same time, you also know that whatever goes on in China right now, there's such control that you can behave yourself well and never say a thing against political against the party or anything like that, and you'll be okay. But there's always that idea that there's always that power in place. It's kind of a brave new world happening there right now, which I say rather more so than in 1984 by all means. It's much more of a brave new world in China. It's moving that way. And that's why the country looks so futuristic at the same time. But there's still pockets of poverty. But at the same, they raised 800 million people from poverty. But there's still poverty. There's still not much of a safety network for medical safety network and so on. And the migrant workers who built the country, I would say in many ways that you can't imagine how much building there is in China. You cannot begin to imagine how much building there is in China. You just can't. It's just beyond the imagination. Just buildings. Never mind the infrastructure itself. So this was built by somebody, and they did, but they don't get the same treatment they should have as same kind of support.
The workers, you're talking about the workers?
The migrant workers, yeah. But still, they're better off maybe now, but still. So China has got a long way to go, but it's gone a hell of a long way by way of relieving a lot of people from poverty and from misery. So it's full of contradictions and tensions. I mean, I find the system it really is. It's interesting to see how, like you're talking about contrast. Yes. Is the word. Yeah, and it is, and that's why it's not always easy to predict what's going to be next. Now that China is behaving quite well, Donald Trump is helping China enormously, and he's not making America great again. He's helping to make China greater. By all means, it's true. But if you look at the unbelievable work they're putting into, green energy, it's just fantastic what they're doing. But they still use a huge amount of even coal, but they're going that way and they believe in it. So I think that China is a country that we have to look at with, how can I say, a lot of anticipation.
And do you think Xi Jinping is there for the foreseeable future?
There was Deng Xiaoping made a very, very strict, he left his legacy was, a president could serve for 10 years, 5 years, and then it could be renewed for another 5 years. And that was very strict. It was Jiang Zemin, it was Hu Jintao, and the next one was, and then comes Xi Jinping, and somehow he wooed the party into believing that he would be like the savior of, the person who could really take China to such great heights and be such a great leader. He didn't expect him to be so autocratic as he is. They didn't expect that. He turned out to be much more autocratic than they expected. He came in and he said right away, rule of law is party law. Freedom of the media is the party mouthpiece and so on. Yeah. So I'm trying to say that it's hard to say. It's got to kind of sum anything up really in terms of where the country is going. But I can see that at the same time that you have so Xi Jinping managed to break that very strong, how can I say, it was law that he would be 5-10 years. He stayed on for another term now, and that was a big deal. That was a very big deal because it showed that he had much more power than he should have had. And he's still there, and who knows how long it'll be. Oh, and he's eliminated, every day you look at the news, you're going to hear more generals being eliminated for corruption, more for ministers and so on. He's always eliminating people around who have shown any sign, a glimmer of a threat to him. And so he's constantly surrounding himself with people who are going to be his own people. Well, Trump's done the same thing.
Yes, I was going to say, it's starting to sound familiar.
So just to finish, so the point is that they're worried that there's no successor because there's no one around him who could be groomed for succession, and that's not a good situation to be in. It's not a basically good situation to be in, to have a leader that has managed to amass so much power, and at the same time, but he still relies on the party because he needs the party. And when he was going to be, before he became the full president, he was the party secretary. He made a very big speech to that way he glorified the party and kind of made them feel, okay, we can trust him because he'll help save us and always keep us in place too. So really, it's a wedding between the president and the party. Yeah.
You know, I have the feeling you're not finished with China yet, because you can hear your passion and your ongoing interest. And we do know that you, in fact, are not finished with China because you have, just having done this, nothing to do now, of course.
No, I haven't.
So now you have a new book that you're starting, which you can maybe just talk a little bit about.
I'm finishing.
Oh, you finished it now.
Because it's a book. I have a book that for some time I wanted to do, and I'm doing it now. It's called Faces of China. It's kind of a companion piece to this book, and I have people. It's not a series of portraits. I can promise you that. So it's going to be very interesting because it's a book of people in situations. A lot of street photography, and so you see it's a very, very alive. I must say that I noticed that also in this book. There's a lot of attention to places that are so enticing to visit and explore, and mysterious or fascinating, like Tibet and Xinjiang and so on, because that's such rich cultures. So but the Han people have the place of place of pride still. Pride is still. So this book is the Face of China. It's going to be, I hope, quite soon. I'm going to use the same designer for this book and the same publisher as I did for the other one, is John Aylen. I'm very grateful to him and to the designer, because Richard Caro, because they've come up with a beautiful piece of work here. By all accounts, I'm hearing, and it's going to
175 photos, I think.
Yeah. But it's 380 pages. But the thing is that it's going to be a really interesting book. It's full of life. This portraits of not portraits, but people. So that's going to be up pretty soon. Yeah.
We believe you, and we look forward to it. And I have to say, having worked on the book with Gabriel, you're so aware of what was eliminated. And before it was printed, I was thinking, oh, this story should have been in, or that story should have been in, and we would bemoan it. But then when you see, and I read that, it just is. It's really tightly woven story of a man's love affair with a country and with its people. So congratulations.
Thank you. I met one person before this talk here who that's discovered is somebody else I met who had been going to China from very early on and right 82 actually, all the way to 19, I believe it was. And and Linda here, and I was delighted to meet someone because I don't know anyone who's gone so progressively and so regularly in have that kind of, and that's what makes this book so interesting. I think is that you could see the changes, gradual changes, and becomes more and more like that as I move along and through the years. So, Linda, Clement. Yeah.
Do we have a couple of moments for a question, or you want to wrap up? Okay, so does anybody in the next 3 minutes have a question for Gabriel that they want to ask? Yes.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, Mr. Safdie, thank you very much for the presentation. Absolutely fascinating. Husband of Linda, I've learned a lot also.
Oh, you're the husband, okay.
Yeah, I am, yeah. I just wanted to ask a question. You talked about communism in China as it is now in 2026 and how you'd hardly recognize the place as being so advanced and so technologically ahead of America.
Well, you've seen it gradually, so you know how it happened.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you've got Xi Jinping in charge there. And then you go back to the death of Chairman Mao in 76, was it?
76, yeah.
Do you think Chinese people now revere Chairman Mao
more
than they do Xi Jinping?
It's a very good question. Xi Jinping wanted to have the power that Mao had, because no one else could have had the kind of power that Mao had. I think that's the kind of feeling he had. But Chairman Mao is still, they know he did some terrible things. I mean, they do know by now. It's not possible to, with the great, apart from the Cultural Revolution, which I mentioned, which is a nightmare. He unleashed that on the country, and you can't imagine what a nightmare that was. You can't begin to imagine. But there was also the Great Famine because of some of his policies, the way Stalin had that, and so on. And he was not a wonderful person any more than Stalin or some of those. But still, by the way, he was a poet, which is nice because he had his red book, his poetry, that. And so there's a certain feeling about him. He brought the country to where it was. He gave the country its start, So he'll always be there. But they still know. It's a kind of a bit of contradictions and a bit. So, but Chairman Mao's spirit will be there forever. Yeah.